Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strange Coordinates, a show where we use brands as compass points to lead us to fascinating stories. I'm Topher Burns.
And I'm Idon Sarakaya. Along with our partner Robert, Topher and I lead an ad agency called Territorial that helps brands find their place in the world. But we're not the only people who love brands. On Stranger Coordinates, we focus on a specific theme and bring a traveling companion with us on the journey.
And today we're excited to dive into the world of naming. It's something we've touched on a little bit in previous episodes, what brands have previously been called or how a name came about. So we're looking forward to spending a little bit more time focusing on that world. We all encounter brand names constantly, but we don't usually stop often to think about where it is that they come from.
And we're not going to explore this idea alone. Joining us today is someone who has worked on hundreds of naming and branding projects for Fortune 50 companies and neighborhood bars. He's been featured in NPR, the New York Times, Monocle, and the Wall Street Journal for naming and branding pieces. His 2014 book, Don't Call It That, became an Amazon bestseller, and his second book, Run Studio Run, is a guide to running small creative studios. Please welcome Eli Altman.
Woohoo!
Hey, thanks for having me.
Welcome. We're really excited to dig into this stuff. You and I have met each other through mutual friends and things like that, but our paths have crossed professionally as well. Back when I was working in branding, the company that you work with is someone we brought in a number of different times to partner with us. Would you just start us off by telling us a little bit about 100 Monkeys and your own experience in the industry?
Sure. So 100 Monkeys is a small branding studio based in Berkeley, California that focuses on naming almost exclusively. We do a little bit of writing too, but the vast majority is naming. I've been with the company 16 years now, been running it as either creative director or managing director for the past 11 or 12.
And you've described yourself as coming from a branding family or growing up in a branding family. What was it like to grow up kind of with advertising and that sort of world? Was it a little bit of a lingua franca in the family? Like, how present was it in even sort of like your childhood?
Yeah, I mean, it was ever present. So my dad ran a early kind of like hybrid ad agency, design agency called Altman and Manley. Did a lot of the like early Ben and Jerry's ads among many others. And then in 1990, he left that and started 100 Monkeys. And so he worked from home a lot and was always happy to like have my help and my brother's help naming things. And so, yeah, we would name things like at the dinner table or on road trips. Always kind of had a yellow pad around and, would just write down a bunch of names and hand them over to him and he'd like circle the ones he liked. And yeah, there was never really any pressure around it. I think it feels a little bit like akin to how a blacksmith's son might become a blacksmith. It's just what I was around. And then I wound up going to design school, thinking I wanted to be a graphic designer for a little while and worked at some design firms in San Francisco, but they knew I had this naming background. And so I wound up pretty quickly running naming projects for these design firms.
Yeah.
And then, if that's the path they put me on, it's much easier to come back to 100 Monkeys where my dad was kind of nearing retirement and rest is history.
I'm wondering, are you familiar with kind of, speaking of names, where the name for 100 Monkeys comes from? Is that kind of the traditional sort of typewriter adage?
Yeah, exactly. You put 100 monkeys at 100 typewriters, eventually you get a sonnet of Shakespearean quality. That takes a lot of efforts to get to something that really works well.
I mean, it's such a fun and delightful, very evocative image that brings along with it kind of the whole process. I think it's personally, from my perspective, I think it's really effective. It also reminds me of my favorite Simpsons, maybe my favorite Simpsons scene ever. Do you know the one?
I know exactly the one. Yeah.
It's I'm gonna say it anyway because I don't.
Tell
You
us
have
more.
you don't.
No,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't think I know it.
Uh, I think. Do you remember what the setting was? Mr. Burns is going through and showing all the great things that he has that are innovating things in his like factory, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then he like busts open the door, and I
Yeah,
remember like the particulars, but it's 1,000 monkeys at 1,000 typewriters because he needs to.
yeah, because he's leveling it up.
Yeah.
And so the monkeys are all smoking cigarettes and they're working real hard. And the one monkey comes up and hands him something and he reads it and he goes, "It was the best of times. It was the blurst of times. Confounded monkeys." And then like, and I repeat that to myself sometimes just for a little tickle during the day. Uh, but I'm glad, it is something that I really enjoy about um, seeing how sort of a lot of people say in the industry they say like a carpenter's kids have no shoes. It's nice.
Cobblers.
Cobblers, yes, thank you. Yeah, that wouldn't send it back to the monkeys. We'll blame the monkeys on that one. Yeah, but the carpenter's kids have no wooden shoes.
There we go. Clogs.
Yeah, exactly. It is nice to see when companies dedicated to doing something well also uses that acumen for themselves. Idon and I were discussing, and we thought it would be fun to put you a little bit on the spot and feel very comfortable being as candid as you feel. How do you feel about the name for our company, Territorial?
I like it. I think there's a couple different ways you can take it, which is one of the qualities I look for in good names, that there isn't just one read on it. Right? Like the idea of territory, of land, kind of mapping something out, like that feels really nice. But then there's also the sense of like being territorial, knowing what your business is relative to someone else's business. And so I like that it isn't, like we call some names like sunshine and rainbows, like things that just try to be just everything is energy and positive and innovation. I like that there's like a little bit of edge to it. Whether that was intended or not, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, we were excited to have multiple different layers of meaning to it. We've really enjoyed, like taking the component of exploration as a thing that, like their territorial does have an edge to it. And we sometimes say like, we're territorial, but we play nice as a little bit of like a fun thing. But then we also like, the podcast being named Strange Coordinates came from the idea of territorial and exploration and things like that. So it's been fun for us to play with. And, you have to like your first and foremost, you have to believe in and enjoy your own name. And so I think that's, it fit that standard for us. And so it's just interesting to hear what other people pull from it.
Totally. I mean, you say that, but lots of people don't enjoy their name. Like they think about it as fitting in or like something that they don't want to get made fun of for, or something that needs to communicate some descriptive idea of what they're doing. So yeah, I mean, having to live with it, it's like might as well make it something that brings you joy, or at least some emotionality.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing Idon and I have been really excited to talk about is, I have it right here, but one of your books, Run Studio Run, it's a thing that has linked Iodon and I as well, because it was an early thing that when we started talking about working together, I shipped her one of these copies. You were kind enough to ship me one a long time ago. And it's been something that it is a dog-eared copy. I'm still like kind of like marked on a specific page because it's been something fun to go back to. I hear a lot of kind of like your personal journey that you walked us through a little bit of in terms of the book. Do you want to just talk to us a little bit more about kind of like what brought you to pull this book together?
Yeah. I wound up running 100 Monkeys because my dad was retiring and because I had a lot of naming experience and project experience, but I had very little running a company experience. And so that felt like a big weakness. And so I tried my best to read as much as I could, listen to podcasts, watch videos, go to talks, like do what I could to immerse myself in that culture and learn how to be good at it. I think one of the early realizations I had is that like becoming a manager, like running a studio, is its own skill set. Like just because you're good at the component parts doesn't mean that you're good at running something. It needs to be respected as its own area of expertise. And often like the people who are really good at like executing work are really bad at like managing the process of others doing it. And so I read a lot, and the amount that I pulled out of these books, like most of the time, was pretty small. Like there'd be a couple little lessons or things that I'd pull through. But the big part of that is because very few, if not any of these books, were written for somebody running a small studio. One, like running a small business, period. Okay, there's like some books about running a small business that are pretty decent. But then the creative environment, I think, brings its own set of challenges. And that book just didn't exist. So I, after I applied all the learnings from all these books, resources, et cetera, the company grew, we were more profitable, we were growing, all this stuff was happening. And I just wanted to write all that down. I just felt like if I had this when I was starting, it would have saved me a ton of time. I guess that's why I did it.
Yeah. It's also the best gift to receive at the start of a journey like this. I came from a more of like a businessy consulting background, so a little less like come up through the traditional industry like Topher and Robert. And so there were aspects in it that I was like 100% constant part of my time. But then there were other moments where I was like, oh, this is something I've never encountered before, because most of the people that I'm working with are engineers or technologists. And so the way that you're operating a project like that is very different than something where you're giving creatives an opportunity to solve for a big idea or what have you. And then I think the other part that really jumped out to me and made it just a little bit more relatable and easier to see yourself in it was also the quotes from the various folks that you spoke with, scattered throughout. It just kind of humanizes the process a little bit, because so much of like business literature is like, I don't know, it feels very academic in like the wrong ways sometimes, where it's just like to the point of, you know, what am I reading?
Yeah, and I was amazed at how so many of the business books were like very unintentionally sexist, or had just like really weird power dynamic things going on that they weren't acknowledging. And the examples really bad. There were some like really easy fixes, like some things that just felt like, oh, that doesn't sound right. But thank you. I'm really curious, like as somebody who wasn't coming to it from like a design world, like what components of it felt like, felt really new to you.
I don't know if this is the newest one, but this is the one that popped into my head as I was speaking.
Yeah.
Is the idea of like really owning the space in which you're operating. So I did come from services and consulting, and I think that depending on a company's growth stage, you might be in a period where your company starts to like expand beyond the boundaries of like your core services that you operate. And at that point, it's like a revenue get versus like a skill set match. And we at Territorial are really trying to kind of like buck some of the wrongs from our previous roles, where we can create a business that is actually sustainable, not growth at all costs. Growth, of course, everybody wants to grow, but that is also focused on the work at hand. And so the idea of like really knowing and owning that space in which you operate, I feel like is so critical, and something that I had thought about, but thinking about it in the context of like, what does that mean from a creative standpoint? What does that mean from we are strategists? What kind of strategy are we delivering? What types of projects do those look like? What happens, if anything, before? What happens after? How do they connect to each other? What is that full life cycle of services within our organization? It was something I had just been thinking about before, and then reading it in the book, and then thinking about it in the context of these new projects that I was seeing run. It just really stuck with me.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. That's cool insight. I always love hearing like how it hits different people. Like I had a interior designer reach out to me and talk about like how important it was for their business. I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought about interior design as a, as an audience there, but cool that, it's like, it's, yeah, I mean, some of these themes, I guess, really work across a wide array of like creative businesses. It's just kind of cool when it's unintended.
I think one of the things that was cool in your book that I still don't encounter is we've had we've gone through our sort of like hustle culture moment in society where everybody wanted to have a startup, everybody wanted to scale 10x, unicorn this. It was our entourage, fantasy writ large in the business world. And we've had kind of blowback against hustle culture, but that has kind of just landed in a place so far that to me feels centered around the largely disenfranchised and often being laid off middle management type people who are engaged in stuff. The reactions are like quiet quitting and stuff like that. And there isn't much being built that says like, okay, well, what is the future of work and what are the future of businesses if we don't accept constant 10x growth as the prime directive of any business organization. And I think that's the cool thing in how you define what a studio is, that it gives permission. It doesn't, you don't say like studios aren't allowed to grow or aren't allowed to hire people, but there is a much broader conversation about like, what does growth actually mean? Growth means attaining your goals. Growth means trying new things. It doesn't have to mean you're hiring 10 people this year, 100 people next year, which is kind of still almost thought of as like what growth is. And so I thought it was interesting to have a studio actually being presented as like a unit of economic measure in terms of how teams come together to accomplish something through which the practice of that thing itself is rewarding and an important goal, not only the acquisition of money for, expanding shareholder value.
Totally. There's a lot of misconceptions about growth, right? A lot of like dirty secrets to it. There's like, if you're running a 5 to 10 person studio, you don't know how to run 100-person studio.
Right.
That's just a completely different thing. And so I find it funny that so many people's goals are to put themselves in a situation where they don't know what they're doing. It's like, it's brave. It's incredibly brave. But I don't, and to think about like, or maybe not think about like what that actually means for the work that they're doing at that point.
Right.
Like, what are, one of the main things I heard talking to people who are creative directors running other studios was that as their studio grew, they did less and less of the work they enjoyed.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so if you go from managing a 5-person studio where you're very hands-on with clients, running your own projects, talking to everybody who's coming into the studio, everyone who you work with, at 100, that's a completely different scenario. You don't know most of the people you're working with. You have very little client interface, or maybe you only have client interface and you don't do any actual work.
Right.
Everybody gets narrower and narrower as the company size grows. But when you talk to most creative people, they don't actually want those things. And it's fine to want money, like to want to to want to like run a successful studio by however you're defining that. But I think one of the things I really try to outline in the book is that growing can oftentimes be the enemy of income. That figuring out how to be more efficient with what you have can be a much more productive setup than hiring new people, because in the creative industry, people are expensive. And so by hiring a lot, you drastically increasing your overhead, and situations like pandemic happens and stuff like that, where I mean, my goal during the pandemic was not to lay anyone off. That was my
Yeah.
goal the whole time. And I achieved that goal. But like, it wasn't, definitely wasn't trying to 10x when that was happening. And
Right.
and the amount of stress I had, for all of these people was awful, and I didn't like it. And if that was, responsible for like 10 more people's like careers and feeding their family, like that would be even
Yeah.
more. So yeah, it's a tough spot.
It brought to mind something that I was curious about. Um, it's been like 7 years since the book was first published. I know it went through a second printing, so that's awesome, success.
Woohoo.
I'm curious, since you first wrote it, um, you know, all industries change, and certainly we've been through an enormous amount of societal changes and technological changes and economic changes since you first wrote this. You mentioned the pandemic, but the economy has risen and fallen. We've had a lot of political upheaval, and the rise of AI is another big disruptor. I'm curious, do you think are there things that you think you would add to a third edition? Are there things that have changed or adapted to how you think about the lessons that are in the book now that we're in a slightly different world?
I mean, a couple things. I think one we're kind of already talking about, which is that I'm even more circumspect of growth.
Interesting.
Like I don't want to grow 100 monkeys. I just don't want to. I want to, we have incredibly low turnover. The person who's been with the company the shortest amount of time at this point, I think, is like 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's cool.
That's amazing.
I just want to keep that going. And if we grow, I want to reward the people who are still here, not by adding more people, but by paying them more. And then, okay, if everybody gets to a point where they say, actually, we'd really love help with these, offloading these activities so we can focus on XYZ. Okay, then maybe. But it's that's really, really small. And I've also changed a little bit about how I think about goals, like the whole idea of, what gets measured gets managed, and what our annual goal setting looks like. I've kind of relaxed a lot on that stuff, where I'm just kind of willing to accept a certain amount of unknown in terms of what we can and can't control, and really just kind of focus on the relationships, pour all that energy into relationships with partners, with clients. And if that turns into work, great. But this idea of do 10 outreach meetings and things like that. I didn't think we were really getting the return on that stuff that I would have liked to. It also just kind of feels a little forced by design. And so just really thinking about even broader, stoicist principle of dividing things into what you can and can't control, and trying to spend as little energy as possible on the things I feel like I can't control.
It's really interesting. I feel like I've seen a lot of posts on LinkedIn lately, kind of disgruntled with the level of SaaS outreach in particular. Shows you a little bit about my LinkedIn feed, but and I feel like so much of SaaS is the machine of the cold outreach and the just kind of going at it all the time in every direction. And I think we've been thinking a lot internally ourselves about how businesses grow and expand over time. What does it mean to make connections with people? What does it mean to have deeper connections with people? And I think a lot of the success and early success, even since I've been here, since I'm the newest, has been in those kind of warm, or maybe it's one or two people removed from you that, somebody's introducing you to. And it just goes to show that there is so much within the humanity of all of us, right? You want to do good work, you want to manifest good work, and you want to partner with good people. And it really can in a way that I think corporate environments often lose a lot of sight of the individual on either side, both inside that organization or on the other side. It's pretty exciting to be inside an organization where you do get to manifest that and help those kinds of connections happen. So I like the idea of like, where is energy meant to be spent? And relationships is absolutely one of them.
So, okay, I'm excited to get into the trivia. So Robert actually is at pains every time we get into our next segment, which is called Off Brand, to say there's no punishment for being wrong. You don't win anything for being right, because he just wants to make sure everybody understands that this is just about us having a good time.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so we're gonna do 3 questions, and I've got a little bit of an extra credit. We'll see how we're feeling. That comes in at the end, depending on if we need it. First question. Many objects and ideas, words like zipper, hiss, and boom, are named after sounds that they're related to. What is this type of word called in linguistic terms?
Onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeia is correct. And so you're already 1/3 of the way through, doing great. But what I thought would be interesting in this space of onomatopoeia, that's something that we see in names a fair bit in terms of names that sound like things. I was curious to talk about kind of how that comes to life in the naming process, how you guys speak about that. Is that like a type of word that you consider when you're looking at new names? How does the sounding like another thing come to life in the naming process?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways it comes up, and I also think it's a bit more of a spectrum than people realize. Like I think we're trained to say like these words are onomatopoeia, these words are not. But I think some words are like kind of onomatopoeia.
Yeah.
Or they just have a bit of that quality to them where it just, some element of sound is at play. And so, I think one thing that's desirable to many clients about those types of names is they're typically short, which lots of people want, which I disagree with. I don't think we all need really short names, but clients want that. And you can kind of do it in a way where, many onomatopoeias like straddle the line of like, are they even words? Something like clack, right? Like these things that show up as like in a comic book will be like sound effects.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's all sorts of places where that could show up. I mean, I kind of feel like the more unexpected, the better. But I mean, certainly something fun to play with.
I even like, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of that, like first off, is onomatopoetic a word? Do you guys find yourself saying that? I wasn't sure.
It's very hard to say. But I believe it's a word.
Okay. I felt like there were some words that were onomatopoetic, but that weren't themselves. Like, so the 2 words that I could think of.
Now you're saying it, onomatopoeic.
Onomatopoeic. Okay. Some words sound like sound effects. And the like 2 words that occurred to me were bloom and swift. Like bloom sounds like opening, but a flower doesn't actually make a sound when it like opens. And swift sounds like something that's fast, but not necessarily like a car driving by who doesn't make the sound, like.
Right. Yeah. And the way that zoom would be more of a direct.
Right. And it made me think of all the different products that kind of like live in those spaces where it's like evocative and like kind of it sounds like it feels rather than it like sounds like it sounds.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
okay.
almost like you're talking about like the synesthesia of onomatopoeia.
Yeah. Totally. And I feel like that happens in so much of the naming stuff where it's like, oh yeah, I get why that word sounds like the thing you want it to sound like, like a fast brand, a slick brand, a comfortable brand, like those things sound different.
Yeah, or even like in food, it happens a lot, right? We're trying to
Mm.
convey some sense of crunchiness or smoothness, or or something like that,
Totally.
right? Like where the feeling, the like texture or the feeling is more important, right? The situations where the visual isn't the primary sense at play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, question number 2. In 2003, the American Ornithological Society announced a plan to change hundreds of bird names that shared what common characteristic?
In 2003, I was graduating high school.
Sorry, I said 2003, but I meant 23. 2023,
Okay.
very recent.
23?
Sorry.
Okay. That changes things. But I still have no idea, so it doesn't change things that much.
I would say, as a little bit of a hint, what sorts of like political or cultural changes might make us rethink how a lot of birds are named?
Like something about their color or sexuality?
Well, those are interesting guesses, and you're in the right world because it's kind of about sensitivities, and sensitivities and baggage and heritage, but that's because these birds they've decided to change were eponymous. So there's a huge number of birds that have blanks X. So Gamble's quail, Steller's jay, and once I've said that, what does that make you think of in terms of the risk of eponymously bird names that might also correlate to the risk of eponymously named businesses or products?
I mean, yeah, when you name something after someone, you're taking on their history, whether that history is known at the time you do it or not, right? And you also, this happens a lot with like schools and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
As well. I mean, we that's actually come up on a handful of projects where naming things or considering naming things after people, even if they're like long dead, stuff still has a way of making it to the surface. Even whether it's true or not, like it can just be like a flashpoint. But yeah, it's a really interesting point.
So, I mean, this came up briefly in Run Studio Run, where, there's you guys aren't Altman's name emporium.
Yeah.
And like when you think about even studios naming themselves, do you have a point of view about, if you're thinking about naming your company after yourself, or, after an idea or something like that, what are the maybe advantages to going away from an eponymous naming structure?
I mean, we just talked about a big one, right? And also that it doesn't even just have to be you. Like, there's other people with your last name, and they can do horrible things.
That's right.
And like same issue with acronyms. You try to use an acronym, you're responsible both for all of the current things that are using that acronym, as well as all the future things that will use that acronym, knowing that the majority of acronyms exist in military, medical, and academia. So
right. Yeah.
That can
all spaces that are not without cultural flashpoints.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other reasons why you shouldn't too, right? If you ever want to sell your business, or if you ever want to have people who are not you lead meetings, and you want clients to feel like they're still meeting with someone important. There's a lot of reasons why putting your name on the door is more trouble than it's worth. Not to mention that the supposed benefits of it really don't exist anymore. Like the idea used to be that it's like, oh, you're willing to put your name behind it, right? As if naming something not after yourself is disingenuous. kind of ridiculous. But also now, people do whatever. That like just
Yeah.
because you put your name on something and I don't know you doesn't mean anything. So it's
Yeah.
a bit of a ridiculous line of reasoning, but one that certainly exists.
Well, speaking of standing behind your name, it takes us to question 3. Question 3. Which of these is not a name given to a child of Elon Musk? We have Romulus, X-A12, Strider, Exa, Texas. So all of those are names given to a child of Elon Musk, except for one.
We're talking about the children we know about.
Exactly.
Right. Gonna go Romulus. Just sounds a little too normal.
Romulus is actually one of them, unfortunately for your test score. But I think the clue also is in sort of like, oh well, of course he like named one of his children after like the child who suckled at the teat of a wolf and founded Rome. But Texas is not one, although it's either, I think Nevada is.
Okay.
All right. Wow. There is another state that is a child, but the reason I got into this was another concept that I've learned about from the naming world. And it made me think of it when X-A12, the like really famous one that's kind of just like a series of symbols. It made me think about the empty vessel theory of naming. And I wondered if you could explain that a little bit and then also talk to us about whether you think that applies when naming a child a series of symbols that are disconnected.
So empty vessels in naming are names that most people don't understand definitionally. Like they don't have a known association with a name. And so the idea is that becomes an empty vessel, meaning you can pour whatever meaning into it that you want, right? You don't have to compete with somebody else or another company who's using that name to market or brand whatever they're trying to sell. And there's a bit of a spectrum here, right? There's a lot of names where, like Nike, for example, or Starbucks, like those names have origins. Do most people know those origins?
Right.
Like probably not.
Yeah.
And did they know them before these turned into massive multinational corporations? Right.
Right.
Another question. A lot of people have difficulty separating name from brand in that way. Right. Like, oh, of course, Starbucks is a good name. We're not saying it's not, but like success and good names are often conflated when they shouldn't.
I think the iPad was roundly ridiculed until it just was de facto what the thing is called.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, but also that doesn't mean it's a good name.
Right.
Right. There are lots of great named horrible products and horribly named great products. And it's just one of the quirks of modern life. But your question about empty vessels as far as people's names.
Yeah.
Yes, I do think it exists in a way that, like, I had a child recently. I have a 1.5-year-old. And, when you're coming up with names for them, say your partner suggests a name that like of someone you went to high school with, or that's like your great aunt's name or something, like you have associations with that name. So it already feels like it is someone. Now, does that mean they were the only person ever to have that name? Like, no, lots of people have most of the names. So when you decide to come up with something where you're like, no, this is going to be the only kid with this name, you're into pretty ridiculous territory from the beginning, given not just how many people there are on Earth, but also how many people there were on Earth. And so, you got to go pretty out there to come up with something that doesn't have any associations for anyone. But honestly, just not having association, like negative associations for you or your partners, like probably enough.
Are you comfortable sharing the name of your child? And was that an emotionally fraught proposition, being like, I name for a living. How can I possibly resist leveraging my skills in this moment? I don't know. It seems fraught to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not using my skills, but also one, it's an agreement, right? It's not like I am the client in this case, I guess,
Yeah.
and I'm also not the only client. There's just difference. Like, actually, there's a chapter in Don't Call It That about this, like the difference between naming like people or pets and naming companies or products. Like, the audience that's just like a vastly
So
different
different.
consideration
Yeah.
for a person. But also, like, I mean, at 100 Monkeys, like, we have helped to name 2 people.
Oh, no
Oh,
way.
wow.
I can't get into the details of those situations just because, yeah,
Contract?
it's just like and it's a personal thing, but
Wow.
it's fun to work on though.
That's cool. Well, this lines up our extra credit question, because once I started looking at the Elon tribe, I couldn't help but look this up too. My question is, for extra bonus points, in terms of overall rankings on frequency of use, how popular was the name Eli for boys born in 2024? And you can get this within 10 plus or minus 10.
Wait, what units am I using here?
Like how they're ranked, all names being ranked most to least popular. What numeral does Eli come in at? And I'll give you within 10.
I mean, I know it's a lot more popular than it was when I was 0. Like, when that was my name, I went to school with 0. When I went to high school, there's one other Eli, but I run into a lot of little Eli's at parks now, so I know it's more popular. I'm gonna go, and this is all genders.
Only boys.
Oh, okay, it's a boy's name. 112.
Oh, you're not far. It came in at 80th.
Okay.
Wow.
But then if you fold in Elijah, which came in at number 4, and an Elias that came in at number 24.
Oh, wow.
There are a lot of Eli's heading to the professional ranks in 18 to 22 years.
Elijah at 4 is the bigger.
Yeah. And it's basically, they have, you go on the whatshouldiNameMyChild.com or whatever they SEO it. And they have the graph, and basically Elijah has recovered. It was like only this popular in like the 1870s. And it's like back to.
That's when I think of somebody being named Elijah.
Yeah.
I think the decrease in popularity of names is also incredibly fascinating to me.
Like, no one would name their child Brittany now.
Yeah. Or Gary, like these names that are just like at one time were just so commonplace. Just like, oh, why would you ever do that?
Totally. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
We have one last segment right before we let you go. So far, we've been leading the expedition today, but now it's your turn. And we can stray as far from the theme of naming as you'd like, but it's time for us to play Omnipotent Brand Manager. So you've been promoted to the most powerful brand manager in the history of creation. And for the span of just a single project, so you can do anything. What brand would you work with, and what would you do?
I think my favorite branding projects are when people take old companies with a lot of like unused value and assets and like make them interesting again. I love that. When that happens, it feels good.
You love a glow up.
Yeah, exactly. And I love unused potential, right? Like, just seeing these companies where they have so much beautiful stuff that they just don't know how to use because it like feels old or something.
Mhm.
And so, if I were to meld this with like one of my personal interests, like that's probably what I would do for for a project like this. And so I'm a really big like soccer fan and player. And when I was a kid, there were all of these, there was like the Nike and Adidas, but then there were all of these other brands around
Yeah.
that like did some cool stuff. Were known for like one thing generally. Like we're talking Lanzera, Lotto, Diadora, Patrick,
Kappa.
Reebok, Kappa. Yeah, Kappa like is maybe like a cut. There may be like a cut above. But like, yeah, all of these brands that have like amazing history, amazing like vintage portfolios. And I would love to just like bring any one of them into the contemporary era.
Yeah. I feel like I had a lot of Diadora jerseys growing up, soccer jerseys. Yeah.
I had some Diadora ones too. Yeah. I mean, really cool, like heritage Italian brand.
Yeah.
They don't do anything in soccer now.
Huh.
Well, Diadora, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
It's time for a revamp. You have your guy.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah,
To all you activist investors looking to make a purchase.
let's do it.
Well, we really, really appreciate you joining us today, Eli. Thank you so much. And now we know if there's anybody who needs to get tapped, not just to revamp Diadora, but maybe give the name Gary an overhaul. We know who to call.
Love a challenge.
Yeah, this has been super fun, and we've really enjoyed you joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone. To learn more about Territorial and how we help brands find their place in the world, check us out at our website, www.weareterritorial.com. Follow us on LinkedIn, and we're on YouTube Shorts. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.